Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening from wherever you are around the globe. Welcome to WordCamp Santa Clarita 2021, Day 2. Yesterday was awesome. Today, we promise you the same. My name is Sumner Davenport. I'm a specialist in web accessibility, and I am the lead organizer for this WordCamp. You are listening to the 9 a.m. talk this morning with Simon Houghton. This is the Sky Tower track. Please feel free to add your questions to the YouTube chat feed, and that way we can answer them at the end. And if you preface your question with the word question, I'll be able to find it even easier. The pandemic affected all of us. It put us into the position that we needed to get information the best way and easiest way possible. But people with disabilities were left out, especially people that were deaf. Those that rely upon lip reading were not able to see someone speaking because of the mask. There was no captions on a lot of the information that was being sent out over the news stations and the internet, and so they didn't have that as well. Totally left out. And I know that there are people that are attending this WordCamp this weekend because we have live captioning. We are making sure that they can be included in the information that we are presenting. Our next speaker, Simon Houghton, is joining us from the UK. He lives in Hampshire, which is about an hour out of London. He started a campaign during the pandemic to help organizations and staff better communicate with the deaf because of his own personal experience. He will certainly open your eyes to this issue and raise awareness to enable you to better assist your teams and customers. The title of this session is Pandemic Struggles, What It's Been Like for the Deaf and What You Can Learn from This. So here is Simon.
Hi and welcome to this presentation. Thank you so much for attending. I would love to say that I'm in Santa Clarita, the WordCamp. Unfortunately, I'm at home in my home office because the pandemic has meant we had to be doing this virtually. So I'm actually in sunny Basingstoke, which is about an hour outside of London here in the UK. So my name's Simon Houghton and my presentation today is called The Pandemic Struggles, What's It Been Like for the Deaf and What Can You Learn from This? And what I hope that you'll learn from this, obviously the majority of people who are attending, I assume, are in the WordPress community. They are developers, they might be working virtually, they would possibly be working in teams. And you know, with the deaf community, actually 20% of the adult population have a hearing impairment, loss, whatever you want to call it. And that is a difficulty that they carry with them. So the chances are, even if you don't know someone who is deaf, you probably don't realise that you know somebody who is deaf. Now that might be a work colleague, it might be someone from your family or friends. So what I hope is that this presentation will give you a sense of, you know, what is it like to be deaf? What's it been like to be deaf during the pandemic? And what can you do to communicate better with somebody who you either find out has a hearing loss or you already know that they have a hearing loss. So I hope that you'll find this quite useful, and bear with me, there's a bit of an activity which I hope you'll throw yourself into, which we'll do at the end of the presentation before we take any questions. Okay, so with that, let's move on. So, We Support Deaf Awareness is a campaign that I set up pretty much during the pandemic, but to take it a step back, the reason I have struggled so much as a deaf person myself, and I should count out that I am deaf, and I usually, when I do these presentations, I show you my hearing aids, if you can see those, just in case you thought I was a charlatan. I am actually deaf, I wear two. I'm not wearing them at the moment because I'm using this as a microphone. So I set up a campaign called We Support Deaf Awareness, and the reason for that is to help organisations and their staff to be able to better communicate with the deaf. And this spawned because of the pandemic. In the UK, specifically in the UK, that's where I'm from, we had these essential services during the first lockdown. And these essential services like doctors, surgeries, hospitals, supermarkets, opticians, pharmacies. And they were available and they were open. And in every single instance, I have had a real challenge to be able to communicate with them, because I'm wearing a mask, they're wearing a mask, and lo and behold, as a deaf person, I have to lip read. So I had this struggle throughout the pandemic, and it came to a head when I went to an optician's, and I'm now modelling the glasses that I got from the optician's. I arrived at the optician's, I had to have the consultation, and they're doing the typical things, is this better than that, can you see this, can you see that? But the lady was wearing a mask, and she was also wearing a face shield. And I kept on asking, probably about 12 to 14 times, I kept on saying, I'm really sorry, I'm deaf, I have to lip read, I can't hear what you're saying. And she just ploughed her way through, kept on going. Maybe she raised her voice a little bit, I don't know, I couldn't hear. But she just kind of blocked out my request. So she didn't take her mask off. She could have taken one of them off, but she chose not to. And I felt it was not my place to be able to tell her, demand that she did that, because we were in a pandemic. But we were socially distanced. And so I got more and more frustrated as the session went on. Then at the very end of the session, she said, floaters, come back to the opticians. Something else, I didn't hear what she said. Go straight to the ER, or the A&E department in the UK, that's just the equivalent of the emergency room. And I was really shocked, and I'm like, I can't hear what you're saying, I have to lip read, and and by now my frustration levels were up. I was like this picture, as you see in front of you, I was extraordinarily frustrated. So, can you please just tell my wife? My wife was waiting outside. So we went outside, she relayed it to my wife. We then went on to choose some glasses quickly, because she could tell that my wife could tell that I was ready to murder someone. I was just getting so annoyed, so frustrated. We left the opticians, and she told me on the way home what the lady had said, and she said, if you get a detached retina, go straight to A&E. And I thought, well, I missed out on that conversation, because I have loads of questions now. I'm like, why did you say that? What is it that is potentially causes it? What are the symptoms? What can I do to stop it from happening? I wasn't able to ask those questions because the time had been and gone. So 2 weeks later, I had to go and pick up my glasses. I'm getting old, so I've got reading glasses as well as normal. So I've actually got 2 pairs now, and I'm wearing my reading glasses for this. But I had to go back and pick them up. And I was really nervous about this, because my wife couldn't come with me because she works for the local NHS hospital, and she was on call, so she couldn't leave the house. And I had to go on my own. And I said, I'm going to have to do something different here. And I didn't really know what it was, but I didn't want to have that same frustration, difficult conversation with an individual who just clearly didn't understand what it meant. So what I decided to do is I actually doctored my mask. I don't know whether you can see that. So deaf on one side and lip read on the other. I wore this as I walked into the shop, into the opticians, and they had like a COVID station where you had to wash your hands, and they asked you questions. And the lady behind the desk, as soon as she saw me come in, she took a step back, she pulled her mask down, and she said, how can I help? And that was for the first time ever that has happened. So we spoke about it. I said, would this be useful? And she said, brilliant. So I wrote about it on LinkedIn. I had 110,000 views on the article. It's more now, but it was about 110,000 views. Had a lot of engagement from people saying, I had no idea. I didn't realise that the deaf were affected by this. I didn't realise people have to lip read. I didn't realise, what do you do? What can I do? So I ran a training course for 70 people on a Zoom call. That went really well. And to cut a long story short, a couple of other things happened which made me realise that it's not really about deaf awareness per se. It's actually about helping organisations and the staff to better communicate with the deaf. And so I started this campaign. And we'll talk a little bit more about the campaign in a minute, but I just wanted to set the context and the story behind why I'm here and what I'm talking about. Okay? So what I hope you're going to get out of this session? Well, there's a couple of things. First of all, I hope you're going to get a greater understanding about deafness and some of the challenges. Now, I can't talk with authenticity about every different type of deafness and the level of deafness that people have, from mild deafness to profound, and all the challenges that entail. But I can give you my perspective, and my perspective is quite common. There's lots of things in terms of someone who is deaf, who wears hearing aids, who has to lip read. I was born deaf. Not everyone was born deaf, admittedly. But as opposed to someone potentially who might be profoundly deaf, there's a smaller percentage of people who can only use sign language. So the chances are, you may still come across someone, I'm not saying you won't, but you're more likely to come across somebody who is of my type. You know, my speech isn't bad, so you're not immediately reminded that I have a hearing impairment. I wear hearing aids, lip read, whereas somebody who is profoundly deaf and only uses sign language, sadly, there's not as many people, but also you're not necessarily going to interact with them on a regular basis. Now, if you do, we need to get somebody in who can do sign language. Hopefully you can learn. But I'm going to give you the perspective of the challenges that I've had, and I hope that that will give you some level of empathy and understanding, and put yourself in the shoes of someone who's deaf. So that's setting the context for that point. Secondly, you know, how do you know if someone's deaf? It's a hidden disability. Would you know that I'm deaf? Probably not, if you're honest. You know, my speech is pretty good. You might not know that I'm deaf. So how do you spot the signs? What are the things to look out for? Obviously, if they're wearing a hearing aid, it's fairly obvious, but you may not see those hearing aids. You might not wear them. So we're going to cover some of the signs. We're going to give you some practical tips on how to communicate more effectively. So if somebody says, oh, actually, like I would do, hi, I'm Simon, I have a hearing impairment, just to let you know, I'm a bit deaf. I'm known as cloth ears to my friends. You go, oh, right, what do I do? What could I do differently to communicate with that person? You can ask them, that's the first thing. But there are some tips, and I'm going to provide those in this presentation as well. But you know what? The most important thing you're going to learn from this presentation? Well, the most important thing is now, don't adjust your TV sets. You probably didn't hear what I was saying. Maybe if you were lip reading, you might have heard a little bit. And to be honest, I didn't make much sense. The point was, I went on mute and you couldn't hear what I said was the most important thing that you're going to get from this presentation. Now, I've done this presentation quite a few times now, and I always ask the audience, how did that make you feel? You know, what was going through your mind when all of a sudden, the most important thing, you couldn't hear it? So take a few seconds just to think about how that made you feel. A lot of people say, I was frustrated, I was anxious, I felt a bit isolated, I was worried that I was missing out on something important, I didn't know what to do, I felt a bit stressed. Now, welcome to the world of someone who has a deafness or hearing loss. That's what we have all the time, because I don't hear everything that I'm listening to. I'm missing stuff out. And so I feel like I'm always on the outside looking in. So that's worth thinking about as we go through this presentation, so that when you do come across somebody who's deaf, remember then they are feeling the same way. Okay? I'm not going to play any more tricks on you. There's a game at the end, don't worry about that. But I'm not going to play more tricks, I'm not going to adjust the mute settings for the rest of the presentation. So, as I said, this is me. I'm giving you a context of my story because some of the challenges I've had are similar, have and had throughout my life are similar. So I think a lot of people who you come across who have a hearing impairment, they go, oh yeah, that rings true. These are some of the things that they struggle with. And hopefully that will help you to be more empathetic and have those conversations with them. Well, I have a severe hearing loss. I'm not profound. If you're profound, for a lot of people who are profound, they can't hear anything at all. Okay? They might wear what you call a cochlear implant. You'll see something that's on top of their head. They may only just sign. They may not actually use English as their first language, as they say. It's actually just signing as their first language. But I have a severe hearing loss, so I can hear something. It's measured in decibels. I've got a 75 decibel hearing loss. It's on the upper end of the severe scale, but it's not profound. I have a heavy reliance on lip reading. So my friends at university used to say, if you want to talk about Simon but don't want him to hear, just do that. Now, how ironic that that was in 1992, when now we're in the pandemic. That's exactly the problem I have. Okay, so I have to lip read. Without lip reading, I really struggle, even if I've got my hearing aids in, because people think if you wear glasses, you get 20/20 vision. With hearing aids, it's not the same. I don't know why, but I still rely on those other tools that I have, like lip reading and what have you, in order to get the full conversation. Now, I went to university and there were 120 people on my undergraduate degree. I sat in the lecture theatre and I have to lip read, as I mentioned. So I'm sitting there watching the lecture and I found it incredibly difficult because I would watch him or her, there was a mixture, and I would then pick up a particular point and then write down what I heard. But then I would miss what was being said next. So when you look at my notes, it was like a couple of sentences over a course of a 2-hour lecture. It really made not much sense and it was really difficult. I struggled initially in the first year. The university took note, they realised that, so I managed to get a disability allowance essentially, and that paid for a note taker. It was almost exclusively a mum of children who were profoundly deaf. They had to learn sign language to communicate with their children. They ended up becoming sign language interpreters, but they also did a thing called note taking. And as it sounds fairly straightforward, they would sit in the room and they would write everything that they could hear, and it was amazing. So I'd sit there, lip read the lecturer for the entire 2 hours, and this lady would write everything down. And so instead of having 4 lines out of a 2-hour lecture, I'd come away with 16 sides of notes, which is brilliant. So I could just focus on the lecturing, the lip reading of the lecturing, and then at the end, reread those notes. I used to type them up, and so I would reinforce my learning. And happy days, I actually used to sell my notes to my fellow students on the course towards exam time. So I made quite a bit of money. So all in all, it was a good experience. Now, talking of experience, I've had a lot of verbal bullying throughout my life. I went to many different schools. My parents travelled with the job. So very often we'll come to a new school on a Tuesday, midway through the semester, new school, new area, and people going, "What's that behind your ears?" Get my lovely hearing aids, and they're going like, "Oh, what's that?" And I used to laugh it off, and I used to say, "Oh, I'm a spy. I'm listening to the radio," and it hurt me, but it toughened me up from a point of managing change and being adaptable. But I also got it in my career as well. And when I first started my career, I worked for one of the big 4 management consultancies in London, and I was on a project in Scotland, and I was unceremoniously thrown off a project because I had misheard what was said and an action given to me. So I was in a room as a boardroom style, about 20 people, 25 people, all packed in, mixture of consultants and clients. An action was given to me. I was a team lead. I took that action down. I executed it. A couple of days later, from the consultancy, the director, the program director took me to one side and he said, "You've messed up." I said, "Oh, what do you mean?" He said, "You didn't do that action." I said, "Yes, I did. I said, here's my notes." And he goes, "No, you didn't. You did the wrong action." And I said, "Oh, well, I'm really sorry. You know I'm deaf. What do you want to do?" And he says, "You're off the project. You fly back to London tomorrow on the following morning." And that had a profound effect on me because I was really angry about the fact that there was no support. They could have done it completely differently. They could have said, whatever it was, I'm sure it wasn't, groundbreakingly disruptive. What can we do to stop that from happening again? But that conversation never happened. So the reason I'm saying that, and the reason it's important for people who are deaf, communicating with people who are deaf, is that is common, okay? That happened in 2001, 20 years ago, and I remember it like it was yesterday. We remember the bad things. we equally remember the good things. I can remember the time when somebody took so much time over my helping me with some maths because they knew I was deaf. I can remember people giving me time in work to help me understand what was going on in a meeting. So you remember the good, you remember the bad thing, but you also remember the good things. Now, I'm a perfectionist. I've got imposter syndrome. I had imposter syndrome before it was trendy. So, I know that I've got challenges throughout my career. Whether it was because of that instant, whether it was because I was deaf, I don't know. But I'm constantly trying to play catch up. Now, more practically, as a deaf person, I really struggle in large groups. Now, this might be in Zoom calls, it might be in face-to-face workshops and meetings when there's lots of people. We have this thing called the meerkat, and I call it the meerkat effect, where I have to lip read. So when someone says something, I don't hear what they say initially, I hear noise, right? I'm alerted to the noise. Now, like a meerkat would be looking out for danger. I'm looking to see the lips moving. That's what I'm trying to do. So I haven't heard anything, I've just heard noise, and then I zone in on the lips, and go, I can start lip reading, I can start hearing what that person says. Then somebody else chips in. Oh, right, who was that? What was that? I heard noise, I didn't hear what they said. So what happens is, someone who's deaf, who has to lip read, they miss the beginning of a sentence. They miss the beginning of what was being said. So, and this thing, I've named it called Mental Hangman. You might remember a game that we all played called Hangman, where you try and work out the word or the phrase and you draw the hangman before, it's mental hangman. So things like the something sat on the something. That's what I've heard. I haven't heard the whole thing. I don't know whether it's important or not, but I've missed 2 words out. Next sentence, something, cat. I'm thinking to myself, maybe the cat sat on something, or did something sit on the cat, right? Next sentence, something, mat. Could that have been related to the first thing? Did the cat sit on the mat? The second sentence and third sentence have got gaps in there as well. So I'm constantly referring back to words and sentences that are incomplete. And that's really tiring. It's really tough. I say it's mentally taxing. By the end of a Zoom, 2-hour Zoom call or a workshop, I'm spent. It's so challenging to do. It's a necessary evil, but it's challenging. So knowing that, if there's someone who's deaf, that's worth its weight in gold for the person. You could do different things, and we can talk about some of those things. Not really too much in here, but I'll give you some clues at the end of the presentation what you can do. Telephone's hard as well, naturally, for someone who's deaf. If it's important, I can still speak to my parents and my family on the phone. I'll ask them to repeat many times. But if it's important things like, house insurance or, the Chinese takeaway, I get my wife to do those things. So I have strategies in place to make sure the important things aren't missed out on the telephone. But I struggle, and most deaf people do. There are ways around it, and there's strategies like text and things like that. But just to let you know that there are some things that we do have to struggle with. And I work in organisational and behaviour change, so that's my career of about 20 years. I've worked all over the world. I've had different cultures that have not understood deafness. That have understood deafness. But I utilise that now on the basis of this pandemic, using that to sort of say, how can I help people communicate more effectively with the deaf, with the background I have of being deaf, but also behaviour change. And so I set up this campaign called We Support Deaf Awareness. I've told you about why I set it up. What exactly is it? Well, just briefly, on the 2 sides here, on the right-hand side, got promotion. The idea is that every shop window, reception area, office reception, they all have these signs here, We Support Deaf Awareness, and that tells people who come into the shop or to the office or to the doctor's surgery that the people who work there have had some basic training in deaf awareness. It's not like a degree in deaf studies. It's about an hour and a half, there's 12 modules, it's quite easy to get through, you can go at your own pace, but it gives you a bit of an understanding of what it's like to be deaf. We talk about the meerkat, we talk about the mental hangman and stuff like that, and some specific tips on face-to-face video calls and on the telephone that you can apply. But ultimately, what does it boil down to? And it's about creating that more empathetic, kinder and patient conversation. And it doesn't have to be about deafness specifically. We are going to grow this into hidden disabilities, but if someone who's autistic, an old lady who's trying to get her money out of her purse in a shop, it's about creating that empathy. And I think we've lost a lot of kindness because we had the first lockdown in the UK, and people were banging their pots on a Thursday evening for the NHS, for all the good stuff that they were doing. And then we came out of the first lockdown, and then we went into a second one. And we went into the second one, I think collectively we all went, oh, not again. Do I really have to keep banging pots on a Thursday evening? Do I really have to be saying how wonderful the NHS and checking on my neighbours? I just want to get back on with my life. And I think the level of kindness dropped. And I think that's where I saw that. And so what I really want to create is, more empathy for anybody in society. But, it's just me. So we're starting off with deafness and, we'll see how we go. Now, it actually says 24 employees. Well, in the last week, it's gone up to 50,000. So we've had two large NHS trusts in the UK have signed up. So we now have 50,000 employees who now have access to the training that I've just described. Cuts a range of different companies, from very, very small businesses to large employers like we've got Diageo and some of the NHS trusts in the UK. But it's a whole range, there's charities as well. So it's been really, really successful. It launched on the 12th of April. And that was because we had all those essential services that I told you about that had problems initially. Well, on the 12th of April in the UK, most of the other businesses could open up. And I was worried about, going into 7 different shops and having that same conversation. That's why we started there. But since the 12th of April to the current date, we've got about 50,000 employees, and we have a large number of organisations in the pipeline as well. So let's talk about deafness. That's what we're here for. So we're trying to find a bit more about what it means to be deaf and what kind of deafnesses are there. Well, there are generally 2 types. Now you see this diagram on the right hand side. You'll see this snail-like structure, this light blue snail-like structure. That's the cochlea, okay? In there it's fluid filled and have all these hairs, these nerve endings all just sitting there. And as sound travels through, certain nerves pick up a certain frequency. The sensory neural is a frequency hearing loss. I have a high frequency sensory neural hearing loss. It's basically nerve damage. So in that cochlea, those hairs for a particular frequency are damaged. Now I was born deaf, so the hairs were never there for the high frequencies. So if you're or the high pitches, whereas for the low frequencies, so like the vowels, A, E, I, O, U, very low, I can hear some of those. I'm pretty deaf, but I can hear those better than I can hear the high-pitched sounds. You can get that from birth, like myself. You can also get it from aging. So as we're working in an aging population, people are living for much longer. You get cell breakdowns. So people in their 70s and their 80s, they may start to have difficulty with hearing. Also from noise damage. So there's a great movie on Amazon called The Sound of Metal, and it charts the progress of somebody who is a drummer in a rock band, and he loses his hearing. He has sensory neural hearing loss because it's damaged the cochlea, and he actually ends up getting a cochlear implant, which is something you might see that sits on top of the head, on the side of the head. But we're not going to go into too much detail there, but it's a really good movie. So if you're interested, I thoroughly recommend that you watch that. And then there's conductive, which is around a blockage or perforation. So you might get the eardrum, a ruptured eardrum, glue ear, and a whole range of different things. Grommets, you might have heard of those when you were growing up and go swimming. Well, there's a fried egg in the middle of the ear. Not really, it just looks like a fried egg on this diagram. You see that yellow in the middle and light blue on the outside. That's the eardrum, and it can have a temporary or a permanent hearing loss based on those blockage or perforations. But how would you know if someone's deaf? So you know roughly there might be a frequency, or it might be a blockage, in which case you can't hear anything. But what are the signs? So this is just going to give you a bit of a sense. But before I go into this, just remember, it's a bit like body language. Just because someone's folding their arms doesn't mean to say they're defensive. That might just be their natural position. So you pick up on a number of different cues that tell you that that person is bored or that they're just interested. It's exactly the same with this. This is only some of them, not the full list. The full list is on the training, just there's not enough time. But I'm going to give you some of these clues, but you have to take them as a jigsaw. You take all the pieces into play. It's just because someone has a diction and their speech is a bit different. Maybe they're a bit flat-lined, maybe not very varied in their frequency, like sometimes I am. It doesn't mean to say that that person's deaf. It might be they've had a stroke, or it might be they have a speech impediment. So take it all in context. But if a lot of these start to ring true, it might be a clue that person might be struggling. And then you can choose some of the things at the end of this presentation to apply to help them more effectively. Some words are spoken differently. Now, if you're from the UK, you'll know who this person is. He's a singer, an opera singer, very famous opera singer. I apologise, but I've been saying her name wrong. I only found out a couple of months ago. I'm 47, and this lady has been around for 30 odd years. I thought her name was Charlotte Church because there's CH. I didn't realise her name was Charlotte Church. So I completely misunderstood her name. I can't hear that. I can't hear that frequency. I can't hear that sound. The ch and the sh. So I try my best. So I've been calling her Charlotte Church all this time. If you hear somebody saying a word slightly or sound slightly out of context, that's a clue that maybe they have a frequency hearing loss. Okay? They turn their dominant ear. Not everybody has completely the same level of hearing loss in both ears. Some people are completely blocked in one ear, but they are fine in the other. In my case, I have about, it's difficult to tell, but let's say 10%, 20% hearing loss in my left ear, maybe 30%, 40% in my right ear. This is my dominant ear. My right ear is my dominant ear. So I will, when I'm having a conversation with someone on the video screen or face-to-face, I often lean in. I lean in because I'm trying to get my best ear in front of the conversation. So if you see that, that's a clue that somebody might be having a difficulty in hearing you, or they might manhandle you. My wife always stands to my right side when we're going out for a walk, when we go out, because she knows that I can hear her through my right, not my left. Another clue. Somewhat withdrawn. So sometimes people who are deaf, they might appear to be not antisocial, but just sort of a bit withdrawn. And that is because we're concentrating so hard on trying to hear what's being said that we haven't got time to communicate and involve ourselves. I mentioned about the meerkat, so I'm constantly doing this all day long, trying to hear, playing mental hangman, trying to understand the gaps in the sentences. It's really tough. It's exhausting at the end of the day. So that person might be quiet. It might not be because they're antisocial or they just don't want to talk. It might be because they're actually struggling. And when they do talk, some of the frequencies are a bit off. They lean in with their dominant ear. Maybe their speech is a little bit flat. It's a clue. They position themselves strategically. As I mentioned, I put my wife to my right. Another clue is that when I go into a meeting room, I'll try and get into the meeting first. And people, Simon's really keen to be, he really wants to come to this meeting. Not necessarily. I want to make sure that I've got my back to the window, because if I'm facing somebody and the window's behind them and the sun is streaming through, what happens to their face? It goes into a silhouette. So I can't see their lips anymore. So what I will do is I'll make sure that I've got my back to the window so that I can see everybody, and hopefully it's not dual aspect, but if it's just one window, I'll make sure that I'm not seeing the window so that I'm not going to be affected by the sun. So, we're going to talk about 7 easy ways to become deaf aware. Okay? These are just 7 very simple things that you can do to improve the way that you can communicate with people. So the first thing, get lippy. If you're wearing a mask, I'm wearing a mask, take a step back to be socially distanced, pull the mask down and just ask, how can I best communicate with you? That really helps empower the deaf person to sort of say, wow, someone's asking me for my opinion. Yes, have you got a whiteboard and we could write it down? Or can I write it on a piece of paper? Or can I just lip read you? Or do you have an interpreter who does sign language? Or, it's great. It's really great. And you're going to build that relationship up, and you're going to have a customer or a friend for life by just doing this one thing. Secondly, face on. So when you talk to somebody and they're having to lip read, or even just trying to hear you, got their dominant ear, try and stay face in front of them, whether on a video call, for if you're discussing code or you're doing something to do with WordPress, or you're doing a website, face on. It's very difficult, and I've seen this so many times, it's very difficult when you've got two screens and you're deciding you're just going to start carrying on the conversation, but you're not looking at the camera. I can't hear, and as much as I've been lip reading for 47 years, I can't lip read half a face. It's so much easier with the whole face. So when you're talking to somebody, make sure your face on. Don't turn your back. So when I started this campaign, somebody mentioned to me, so I run a restaurant, a bar, a pub. In the UK we call it a pub. What can I do? And I said, well, the thing is, when you take a drink order from somebody, typically you ring the order on the till behind you. So take the order from the person who might be deaf and say, look, I'm just going to ring the till. I'm going to be back and I'll get your drinks in a minute. So you've told them what you're going to do. Then turn your back and then come back and then get the drinks. Don't carry on the conversation whilst turning away. So whether that's like this, or don't carry on talking like that. Do what you need to do, come back to the screen, or when you're having a conversation with someone face to face, make sure you stop the conversation if you have to turn away. Maybe you have to use a computer. Say, I'm just going to use a computer for 5 seconds. I'll be back in a second and we'll carry on. Do that and then go on. Okay? Hands off. The great pandemic beard. Everyone's loving their beard. Oh, it's amazing. I've had this for 18 months. It's down to my chin, down to my knees at the moment. I'm loving it. I'm playing with it all day long. I love this so much. When you do that, I can't lip read you. Your hands are in front of your mouth. When you're chewing a pen, when you've got a drink and you're going, oh, isn't this wonderful? It's fantastic. Don't put a barrier in front of your mouth. Just because we're not going to be using masks in the future doesn't mean to say that we're not going to have barriers. So consider what you're doing with your hands when you're communicating, or what you've got in front of you, in front of your mouth when you're communicating with someone who's deaf. Talk at normal speed. I've learned to lip read for 47 years. I learned at normal speed. I didn't learn at a slow speed, because when you do this, it's very condescending, okay? But equally, when you're talking really fast, really quick, it's really difficult to lip read. So when you're talking to someone, just talk at normal speed. Now, if somebody is struggling because they're deaf and they're lip reading, and maybe they've just started to learn to lip read, maybe just bring it down a notch, slow it down a little bit, but not too slow, but try not to make it too fast either. Spell it out. So sometimes when you're doing references or even coding or taking a zip code, or in the UK we call it postcodes, and it has letters and numbers, or if it's an important address or something, when they spell it out really quickly, like AB10 6XY, it's over and gone within a second. I'm like, whoa, haven't heard any of that. If, on the other hand, you went A for Alpha, B for Bravo, the number 10, I can then start to pick those up. Because if I didn't hear A, but I heard a bit of Alpha or Alpha, okay, maybe he's saying A, and then B for Bravo, I can pick that up. So it means that you don't have to repeat it several times. You can repeat it, just say it once, but you slow it down a bit, and it's so much easier for the person who's deaf to hear what you've said. Okay? And then finally, and I've talked about this already, avoid backlighting. So we're talking about making sure you've not got the sun behind you, because the person may not be able to lip read you because the whole face is put into a silhouette. You'll probably find the deaf person will move, or they might ask you to move. But just be aware of that. That's one thing you can do. Sometimes on Zoom calls, it's hard because you've got your setup, but be aware of what you look like in the Zoom call when you see your camera, and that will give you a clue whether somebody can lip read you. Can you see your own lips? If you can't, then the deaf person can't either. Okay? And that essentially is the end of the presentation, but we're now going to do a little exercise. Okay? I'm going to help you try and empathise even more being deaf. So I'm going to go on mute, but I'm going to tell you 5 or 6 things about myself, and you can have a go at seeing if you can understand what I'm saying. Okay? All right, just give you a bit of a sense of what it's like to be deaf. So I've got 6 statements, okay? And I am going to start it. So for the first sentence, okay, and I'm going to go on mute, but I'll repeat it. Okay, I'll do that one again. Okay, how did you get on with that one? Okay, so what I actually said was, I'm a big Liverpool football fan, so don't ask me about supporting Manchester United. Now, some people who've done this before, they've said, football, Manchester United. Yes, you're a Manchester United supporter. So the clue there is you have to have the whole context. So just because you hear the odd word, you've got to build up the whole context to know exactly what was said. So I'm a Liverpool fan, not a Manchester United fan. Okay, so we'll do another one. Now go on mute. Okay, we'll do that one again. How do you get on with that one? What I said was we are shortly getting a new puppy who we are naming Henry. Okay, so we'll do 2 more. Next one. Okay, I'll do that one again. Okay, how do you get on with that? Okay, what I said was, I love all music, classical, pop and R&B. My favourite period is probably the 80s. I can't sing to save my life. Okay, all right. And then the final one, okay, I'm going to go on mute. Okay. Okay, so I'll do that one again. Okay, so what I actually said was, I thoroughly enjoyed presenting today and I hope you found this useful. And hopefully the last one reminds you, it's not just about masks, okay? So there's barriers in front, so hopefully you've learned from that and I hope you understand how better to communicate with deaf people. If you'd like to learn more about the awareness campaign that I've set up, and if you'd like to join, then I'm on Twitter at @deaf_aware. I'm also on other things on LinkedIn and Facebook, or you can contact me at simon@wesupportdeafawareness.org. That's the end of the presentation. Do you have any questions?
Wow, that was an awesome presentation. Thank you so much, Simon. To be inclusive, I will be taking audience questions and typing them in a chat session with Simon. So as he reads them, I will be speaking them so the captioners can add the captions to the live stream. I don't type nearly as fast as I talk, so please be patient with me. It was a great example you gave, Simon, when there was suddenly no sound. It startled a few people and other people tried to adjust their sound, and it gave everyone an immediate awareness. And it was a great tip to tell people that they should be facing a person when they're talking to them and speaking normally. And I have a question for you, Simon. What are a few examples of difficult web experiences?
Yeah, thank you, Sumner. I think the biggest one that I can tell is around when people put video onto their website. So obviously, if you've got text, that doesn't impact me because of my hearing. It's more like if it's someone who is visually impaired on text. But for me, when you're watching videos, if they haven't got captions, I find that really difficult. A lot of people in the deaf community, they ask you to put hashtag no captioned or hashtag captions in your LinkedIn post or wherever it might be, to show people that you recognize that for deaf people, this may or may not be easy for them to understand. So yeah, if you've got videos, if you can put captions in, that makes it so much better for everyone.
Thank you, Simon. Another question from the audience. Do you think the focus on making all sites accessible that became apparent to all local businesses, curbside, takeout, online ordering, during this pandemic will continue, since times people go through, they go right back to bad habits when they perceive the threat is over?
That's a really good question, and something that I've pondered a lot, because this campaign that I've started around deaf awareness, when we all go back to normal, what will happen then? And in the UK, tomorrow is the day where people will begin to just essentially if they don't want to wear a mask, they don't have to. But a lot of people are quite nervous about that. So my hope is that people, and that's the reason why at the very end, the last activity where I had a mug up to my mouth, because I really hope that people realize that deaf awareness has been around for decades. And what we're really seeing is the pandemic is providing an opportunity for people to kind of reset expectations around how difficult things are for being deaf. And I hope that we can push on from this, so people will begin to understand. The websites will be accessible for all disabilities. And as I mentioned earlier, with regards to video, captions become more prevalent.
Thank you. A comment that was placed in the stream: in addition to helping with hearing loss, everything you said is relevant for communicating as and with non-native language speakers and attention challenges. So thank you very much. It's very inclusive.
Yeah, I totally agree. I've known lots of people who have come from Eastern European countries, for example, come to the UK. And when you've talked about the challenges that I've faced, it mirrors exactly what people from other countries who don't speak that language as their main language. And I think it goes back to what I mentioned about being, empathetic, patient, and kind. It's about society being that, not just about deafness. It's about everyone taking that time to put themselves in the shoes of someone who might be struggling, be it that they're they don't speak English as their main language, be it that they have a hearing impairment, they might be blind, whatever it might be. And I hope everybody begins to become a bit more empathetic going forward.
I want to thank you, Simon, for your insight and for sharing your experience and very workable solutions to assist people to have better deaf awareness. Do you have any closing thoughts for the audience?
I suppose if this audience is the majority of people around WordPress, I would encourage them to really put accessibility at the heart of their websites, because ultimately, there's 20% of all adults have a hearing impairment, but if you take all of the different disabilities to varying degrees, it's a very large percentage of your population. So you're isolating potentially 50% of your customers, of your blog viewers, or whoever it might be, by forgetting to include the accessibility features that people have been learning on this conference.
Thank you, Simon.
Cheers. Thank you very much indeed.